Hello and welcome to Synergy 2024. My name is Jerry Viteratos, and in this session, I will show you DT Max Unveiled, Past and Present Improvements. Let me present myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jerry Viteratos. I'm a tax consultant and lead trainer for DT Tax and Accounting, a division of Thomson Reuters. I've been with the company for over 15 years as a trainer and tax support resource person. As the head trainer or lead trainer of the company, I've been providing compliance training solutions to tax professionals such as yourselves for over 15 years, whether it is on various tax topics or on the usage of our compliance product, which is DT Max. I am also the media representative of Unveiled, which is our consumer product, and I've made TV appearances on BNN, CTV News Montreal, and Global TV, discussing a multitude of tax topics. On the educational side, I obtained my master's degree in taxation from the Université de Sherbrooke in 2020. The objective of this session is to look at some upcoming tax changes and how they're going to be applied to DT Max, and also give you an overview of some of the recent enhancements or improvements that we made to DT Max in the last several years. So as far as the agenda, first we're going to look at some recent DT Max improvements that we made to the software. So we're going to go screen by screen. First, we're going to look at client list improvements. We're going to look at how to sort the client list, how to make family groupings more visible, look at a feature called the e-file consent status, and also look at the active filter. From there, we're going to go to the data entry, and we're going to look at some improvements like review tags and the tax workflow and tracking. And finally, we're going to look at the tax return improvements or tax return screen improvements. We're going to look at review tags and notes, general checklist, pro forma questionnaire, and the tax savings reconciliation. From there, we're going to go into a preliminary version of DT Max and show you some upcoming tax changes and how they will be reflected in the software for the upcoming tax season. So let's go into DT Max and have a look. So we'll start off with the recent improvements of the client list, and we're going to start with sorting. Now, as you are aware, DT Max will provide some basic information on every single one of your clients within the client list. The way DT Max does this is by adding columns here to the client list and providing that information. So for example, you see the client number, the name of the client, the birth date, the age, and the processing status of the client. And this view right now is the default of DT Max. You can personalize the client list. In other words, you can choose which columns to add in the client list by simply clicking on the gears icon within the top taskbar here, or by going to the Preferences menu and choosing Client List Settings. By going there, you can now pick and choose which columns you would like to see and even remove columns you don't want to see within the client list. Now, by default, DT Max will allow you to sort on 3 specific columns: client number, client name, and birth date. The way you know that these columns are sortable by default is through this little line next to the description of the column. So you see here next to client number, next to name, next to birth date, there's a little line. When I click on that column header, DT Max will sort now that specific column. In this example, the client name, it'll sort it by pure alphabetical order, meaning that you see your client list in alphabetical order, regardless if it is the family head, spouse, or a dependent. What you will notice, possibly under your version of DT Max, is that none of the other columns would be sortable. But be aware that you can render every column sortable within DT Max. You simply have to activate the option. In order to do so, simply go to the Preferences menu, choose User Interface, And then once you're there, in the new window, under the Client List section, you have the option there to make all columns sortable. Tick that box. DT Max will give you a confirmation window indicating to you that now every column will be sortable. And then simply click Save at the bottom of the new window. Once that is done, when you click on any other column, for example, let's try processing status, DT Max will now resort the client list and group up your clients by processing status instead of the name or alphabetical order. And now every column becomes sortable in DT Max. Now, once you've used the sorting, you can always go back to the original client list or the family grouping client list by simply clicking on the family icon. Now DT Max has resorted your client list by family groupings. Now let's have a look at the next improvement, which is more visible families. So right now, what you're looking at is my DT Max client list within my database, and you're seeing the default setting of the program. So of course, the family heads are in bold, and you see these individuals that are grouped up together, which represent families within DT Max. Now, unfortunately, the delineations between the families are not necessarily clear within the default setting of DT Max's client list. But you can change that. You can make it more visible. In order to do so, go to the Preferences menu and then choose User Interface. Once in the User Interface window, in the Client List section, tick the box next to Make Families More Visible. Once this is done, click on Save at the bottom of the window, and now you will notice the delineations between the families are a lot clearer. On top of it, the family head now is represented with a different color versus the rest of the family members. You can say that this is going back to the old setting of DT Max's client list for those of you who have been using the software for a long time. Let's have a look now at one of the more recent improvements that we made, which is to add a new type of processing status that we call awaiting e-file consent. What this processing status will do is that it'll prevent you from e-filing a customer's tax return unless you confirm to DT Max that the client has signed their e-file authorization form. Now, this setting is not there by default. You have to activate it within DT Max. In order to do so, go to the Preferences menu and select Users Defaults. In the Users Defaults window, click on the Miscellaneous tab. Once in the Miscellaneous tab, go to the bottom and go to the section Verification Requirements and tick the box next to e-file consent. Once this is done, click Save at the bottom of the window. Now you will notice that all of your clients that were ready for e-file will switch to awaiting e-file consent. This prevents the accidental transmission of these files in the case where the client has not signed their authorization form. Now let's change the status. Let's say now that our client has signed their authorization form and we need to indicate it now to DT Max. How do we indicate that the client has signed their e-file consent? You can do so directly in the tax return screen. simply click on the status information icon. And within the status information window, tick the box next to e-file consent signed. For those of you who are in Quebec, it is the exact same process, but an additional tick mark. Once this is done, click OK at the bottom of the window. If we go back now to the client list, you will notice that now Paul Tremblay has been changed to ready for e-file because we have confirmed to DT Max that Paul has signed his authorization forms. Let's have a look now at the active filter within the client list. So as you are producing tax returns throughout the years with DT Max, you will end up having inactive clients within your client list. For example, clients that are deceased and of course will no longer be producing any tax returns, or clients that have not come back after 2 years. So as of the second year, DT Max will render clients who have not come back in 2 years inactive by default in your client list. So your client list will be full of these types of clients. Well, since a few years ago, we've added what we call an active filter in order to hide those inactive clients. Now you'll notice that in my client list, I've got one inactive client right now. Okay, so you see here is no longer a client. So this is a client that has not come back since 2 years ago. In this case, what I could do is that I could activate now what we call the active client filter and only show the clients that are active within my client list. The way to do so is through this icon right here, which looks like a filter with an A. Simply click on the active clients filter, and now DT Max will hide, in this case, the inactive clients. You will no longer see them. Now, it doesn't mean that the client is gone. The client is not deleted by activating the active client filter. It's just that the program filters them out and essentially hides them. Now, let's say your client comes back in this case and wants to produce their tax return with you. You can reactivate the inactive client by simply disabling the active client filter by clicking on the filter icon again. The program will show you again the inactive client, and then all you have to do is double click in the inactive client and tell the program to reactivate that specific client. Click on reactivate the client and then click OK. And now the file has been activated. So we've just seen some of the latest improvements that we brought about to the client list screen. Now let's have a look at a few improvements that we brought to the data entry screen. And we're going to look at two specific ones, and we're going to start with the tags. So DT Max allows you to tag fields that you are entering within the data entry screen while you are producing your customer's tax return. For example, in order to add a tag to a specific field, simply go to the field, then right-click on the field itself, and towards the bottom of the window, you will notice two tags that the program provides. One is tag keyword for review, which is a recent improvement that we brought to the tags. And then you have another one, tag keyword checked OK, which of course has been there since the program has been designed under Windows. So let's say, for example, that I notice that there's an error within that field, or I'm not sure actually what the result of that field should be. I will tag it to come back to that field later on. And that is what the tag keyword for review is about. So I simply choose the option, tag keyword for review, and now the program will put a question mark next to the field. Now, not only does the question mark show within the data entry, but within the diagnostics of the data entry, you will notice that the program will add a diagnostic for the field that you tagged for review. And then, of course, you can double click on it and the program will take you directly to that field. Now, in this example, I tagged the QPP contribution, which is, again, very similar to the CPP contribution in this case. And these are fields that the program will determine whether the amount that you've entered is correct based on the government calculations. So for example, in this case, I entered $2,000 of QP contributions, and you notice that in the diagnostics, the program is actually flagging it and saying that the amount is not correct as per the government calculation, and it's doing the same thing for EI. Okay, so these are two of the fields that the program will actually compute and tell you what the correct amount is. Now, let's say, for example, that I do check the slip, and you know what? The contribution is exactly what was on the slip. So I entered the correct amount. So now I will change the tag and I will indicate that it has been checked, that everything is fine. So I simply go back to the field, I right click on the field again, and this time I will tag the keyword checked OK. By doing that, now the program puts a green check mark next to the field. I have checked it. I could put this on any single field within DTMax data entry, but the bonus that you get when you are tagging specifically the contributions on the T4 slip, whether it's CPP, EI, and for those of you who are in Quebec, QPP and QPIP, when you tag this keyword checked OK, the program within the diagnostics will remove the diagnostic that indicated that my QPP contribution was erroneous. And this is the only place where these tags will actually remove diagnostics. It'll be for CPP, EI, QPP for those of you who are in Quebec, and QPIP for those of you who are in Quebec. So now let's have a look at a very recent improvement that we made to the data entry starting in 2023, which is the tax workflow review and tracking, or the tax review for keyword group. So what is this keyword group exactly? Well, the keyword group will allow you to log answers to questions you have on your client's tax return during the tax preparation process. DTMax will keep track of the answers to these questions in the data entry through the keyword group and two new forms that will generate in the tax return screen. Let's have a look at this keyword group. So first, when you click on the drop-down menu of Tax Review 4, the program will give you the option of either entering questions and answers for the taxpayer, so the client that you are treating right now, for their spouse, or any other member of the family. So in our example, we're going to go with taxpayer, and you could do this in every single file of each individual family member. Now, as a date, we're going to enter, let's say we're in tax season right now, so we're going to enter a date within tax season when we log the first question that we have for this particular file. So let's say it was the 20th of March, 2024. Once we press enter, the keyword group will expand and now will provide you with several categories of questions that you could choose from. So the keyword group already has preset questions you could choose from and then answer those questions when you get the answers. Now the questions go from very general questions. For example, under the general keyword, sub-keyword, you can choose for, RSPs for the first 6 days of 2024. Did the client make any contributions in this case? Did the client make any donations or gifts during the year? Did the client buy their first home during the year? Etc., etc. They could also go very specific as well. Example, when I go to the business sub-keyword, now I get very specific questions on business expenses and business income. So example, did the client acquire any depreciable property during the year? Are there any allowable expenses for motor vehicle? Are there any business use of home expenses, etc., etc.? So you could choose one of these questions, log the question, and then answer it later on. Now, should there be a question that you want to log within this keyword group that is not found amongst the preset questions, you could actually specify your own question. So the keyword group is customizable. You could enter your own question if that question is not amongst the preset ones. So in this example, under the general subkeyword, I simply choose the option other, and it tells me to specify, and then a box will appear where I can now enter my own question because I can't find it essentially within the preset questions. So let's try a couple of examples to fully understand conceptually how this keyword group works and how you can make it work for you. So let's try two examples in this case. I will put in a question that will be pending. In other words, I don't have the answer right away from my client. And then I'll put a question where I get the answer right away. And then we will see how the program handles both of the tracking of both of those questions. So let's start with a general question, and let's take the first one here. RSP contributions for the first 60 days of 2024. So I know my client here, let's say it's Paul Tremblay that I'm in right now, and I know that Paul makes monthly contributions to his RRSP. Now I notice that he has no receipts that he's given me for 2023 for the first 60 days of 2024. But I know he makes monthly contributions, and he did have contributions in the first 60 days of 2023. So perfect question now and perfect use of the tax review for keyword group. So I will choose here RSP contributions for the first 60 days of 2024. Now, once I choose it, the program gives you the option of entering additional details on that question. And I could, specify it. I could say monthly contributions, but no receipts. So there you go. Now, this question will be pending. I asked the question to my client. My client's not sure. He agrees that he's likely made some contributions, but he's going to go look for his receipts. So in this case, this will be a pending question. So under the answer subkeyword, I will choose the question mark. So this will be a pending question that my client will need to answer to me later on. So that's one example of, in this case, a pending question. So I don't have the full answer. It's pending. I put a question mark and I will await the answer of my client. Now, as a second example, let's try one where I get the answer right away. Again, the purpose of the keyword group is not just to pose the questions, but to log the answers as well. So you have a paper trail to the answers to these questions. So in this case, I will click here and I will choose one of the questions here, and I'll choose the first time home buyer question. Now, I noticed that my client has a new mailing address to his tax return. Now, I know that my client's been living under the old address for several years and he was a renter. Now I see a new address in this case. He was a renter for more than 4 years. So I see a new address right now. So you know what? That could be that my client has either purchased the home or maybe he's just renting, but I want to ask him that question and to log the answer properly. So I will choose the question first time home buyer, and then I will enter as a detail, new address. Is it a purchase of a home? Okay, so now this one, I'll get the answer right away. The client tells me, yes, you're absolutely right. I purchased this home. Therefore, they qualify now for the first-time home buyer's tax credit. So in this case, under the answer, I will say, yes, I have the answer in this case. I got it right away from my client. Now, there's no answer amount in this example because it's not an amount, right? It's a simple yes or no question. Did you purchase your first home? And the answer is yes. So I don't enter anything in amount. Under explanation, I will now indicate, client confirms he purchased his first home. So now the client has confirmed it, and I have the paper trail that the client is confirming that he purchased his home. I put the date of the response, which is the same day that I started this keyword group. So we're going to say 20th of March 2024, because that's when I posed the question. And then I will indicate to the software that the question is complete. I got the answer from my client. They did purchase their first home. It's confirmed. And now this is not a pending question. It is a completed question. So we've completed the keywords. Now let's have a look at how we see the tracking of these questions and answers within the tax return. So I go to the tax return screen, and once I'm there, you will notice two new forms, actually in this case, that will generate in your customer's file. The first one in the menu here will be tax review questions. There's a tax workflow review and tracking. This will be your questions that are pending. So this form specifically shows you the questions that are pending, and that's what this form is dedicated for. So you see again my original question: did my client contribute in the first 60 days of 2024? I've got the details here. I don't have any receipts, and the question is pending, and that's what this form will track. It'll purely track the questions that are pending. Now, for the completed questions, you will have a separate form, which will be the tax review questions completed. And this will be the form that will track all of the completed questions, or the questions for which you already got the answers for. And you see again, there's my original question. Is my client a first-time home buyer? The original detail was, new address. Is it a purchase of a home? The answer was yes. The client confirms that he purchased first home, and I enter the date when the client answered. This will be now my form that will track the answered questions. Now, this form, of course, will be your internal record form. Okay, this is the one that you will keep here in order to track all the questions and answers, because, of course, eventually you will get answers to all your questions, right? Now, the tax review questions, the pending questions form, well, this is a form that you could simply submit to your client. You can PDF this form, email it to your client, or if your client is physically there, you could print it, give it to them, and have them answer the questions, the pending questions that are on this particular form. Now, let's have a look at how we can now answer this pending question. Let's say now that my client has come back and has given me the answer to this question, and now I need to change the answer and make this from a pending question to a completed question. Let's see how we do this. So let's go back to the keyword group. So we're right there, tax review 4. And once we're there, now we're going to answer the pending question because the client has provided me with the answer. Let's say that my client now comes back to me and says, you know what, you were absolutely right. Here are the receipts. I'm bringing you the receipts. I did make contributions in the first 60 days of 2024. So now I will log that answer to my customer's question. And the way I do that is by going back to the original pending question. I'll click on the plus sign next to general question here, and now I will change my answer from a pending or a question mark to yes. So I will choose yes. The client has provided me with the amount that they contributed, in this case in the first 60 days. Let's say it was $2,000. All right, and the explanation: client confirms contribution, will provide receipts. And from here, under the date of the response, let's say it's a couple of days later that the client provided me with the answer. There we go. I put in 22nd of March 2024, and now I will choose yes to complete it, because now this is also a completed question. It is no longer a pending question. So once that is done, I go now back to the tax return. And when I go back, you will notice that one of the forms is gone. The tax review questions form for the pending questions is gone because I no longer have any pending questions. The only thing I have now is completed questions. And now notice that the program has logged both of the completed questions under one form. Again, this becomes your de facto internal form that will track all the questions and answers, and I've got the answer with the details. Now, what's new for 2024 for the tax workflow review and tracking is that we've added this form to the billing module, meaning that under the rate card that you would set up in the billing module, you will now see this form as available, and you could charge now a fee for producing this form and tracking the questions and answers from your clients. We just concluded the portion of the recent data entry screen improvements. Now let's have a look at some recent tax return screen improvements. Let's start with two features that we added to the tax return screen that are related to each other, and these are the review tags and the review notes. So during the process of verifying or double checking a tax return, we've provided two very useful features within the software to, number one, tag specific fields for either review or correction. And we also allow you to add notes to those fields that you either have tagged or flagged. So let's look at an example to see how this works. So I see here $2,050 of dividends. I do a spot check and I believe this is an erroneous amount. This is a wrong entry. So I want to flag or tag this field for correction. And I'm going to come back to that field and correct it later on when I complete the review process. So in this case, I simply go to the field, I right click on the field itself, and now all the tags are available to me. The program provides you with 4 tags: for review, error, checked OK, and final check. As I mentioned as well, the program allows you to also put a review note with the option that you see here. And by using the review note option, you could actually simultaneously choose the tag as well. So let's do that. I will choose the option now, add a review note. A new window appears allowing me to, number 1, choose the tag. Normal for review or error. In my example, I think this is an erroneous amount. I will choose error. And now I can provide a description of the error. So I'm saying that the amount is wrong through my spot check, and please correct, come back to it and correct. Once I've done that, I simply click Save, and now the program will, number 1, color the field. And that's what the tag is. It's coloring the field to give it a tag of an error, which in this case will be red. On top of it, it'll put a little tab on the field itself that you just tagged. That's the program showing you that there's a note, there's a review note to that specific field. So simply hover your mouse over that field, and the program now provides you with the note that you placed on that particular field. When you've tagged a field within any form, the program will also show you the forms that have a review tag. So simply look at the left-hand menu, and you will notice in my example here that I've got the review tag error within page 3 of the federal. So the program will show you all the forms that you've tagged within the left-hand menu form navigator within the tax return screen. Also, you can see a list of all of the fields that you have added a review tag or a review note by simply right-clicking on any field on any form and then choosing the option List All Review Tags. When I go there, you'll see a new window that appears, and now the program will show you a list of all the fields that have a review tag and the notes that go within those review tags. To go to any one of these fields, all you have to do is simply double click and the program will take you directly to the field that you want to go to. You could also modify the review tags at any time and change the notes as well. So let's say, for example, that for this field, I double check the slip and actually everything's correct. The amount is actually correct. It is not erroneous. So in order to modify, in this case, the review tag number 1 and the review note, you simply go on the field itself where you placed the review tag, right click, and then you could go to the edit the review note. Because remember, when you choose the review note, you can actually change the tag simultaneously. So when I choose that, now I will say in this case, I did my final check and the amount is correct. And I could take off this note and say amount is correct. So I change the note, I change the review tag, and then once I click on save, now you'll notice the field changes color. The review tag has changed, it's green, and the tab is still there though. As you can see here, the little red tab is still there. And when I place my cursor on it, you see now the new review note. Some additional information concerning the review tags is number 1, the review tags do not change the processing status of the file. So even if you have fields that you've tagged as an error, they will not prevent the filing of the tax return electronically. Number 2, you can be safe putting these review tags on the official forms of the government. The review tags and the notes do not transmit to the government when you e-file the return. Let's continue with the recent tax return screen improvements, and we're going to look at 2 specific forms that we have added to the program that will help you better organize your customers' tax information that, of course, you will use in order to produce their tax return. Now, the first one of these is what we call the general checklist or the tax returns checklist. What this form will do is it will indicate all the relevant information that was in your customer's tax return during the taxation year. So you see that the program has an exhaustive list of tax topics or information that could be on a tax return and then selects the information that was within your customer's tax return. It will simply tick the box next to the relevant section. So the purpose of the form is to essentially provide this to your clients at the end of your tax production and ask them to consult this form at the beginning of the next tax season in order for them to provide you with all the relevant information, be it slips or receipts, etc., in order for you to properly produce their return. So there is a second type of checklist that the program produces, and it does so within the client letter. So we know what the client letter is. It's a template letter that DT Max produces to give additional info on the customer's tax return, right? So this is a letter that you ordinarily would remit to your client, and it explains to them details about their return. For example, what forms should they sign? What is their refund or balance owing? What benefits will they collect, like GST, Canada Child Benefit, etc., etc., etc. Now, the pro forma questionnaire becomes an additional letter to the client letter. But in order to have the pro forma questionnaire, you must activate it from within your preferences menu. So let's do that. Let's now add the pro forma questionnaire to the standard client letter. So we go to the preferences menu. We choose client letter. Once we choose client letter, a new window will appear, and at the bottom right of the client letter screen, you have now 2 options. One, to generate what we call an engagement letter, which I will explain in a minute and show it to you what it is. And then you have the option for the separate pro forma questionnaire. And again, the essence of the pro forma questionnaire is the same as the general checklist, but we'll see it's a little more detailed. So once you've chosen these options, click OK. And now to start generating it within every file of your clients, we will first start by recalculating this client. So I will go to the Tools menu and I will choose Recalculate Current Client. Once I do that, notice that now I have additional pages to my client letter. I had 2 pages before, now I have 9. This is the presence of the 2 letters, additional letters, that I have added in the Preferences menu. The first of these separate letters that we'll generate will be the engagement letter. An engagement letter is simply an agreement between you and your customer where you indicate to them that you are only responsible for the results of the return based on the information that they provide to you. So this letter is simply to protect you from your customer coming after you if there are any mistakes on the tax return. And you see that there's a signature area for your client for the engagement letter. Now on page 4, we produce another engagement letter, this time for the disposition of a principal residence. So due to the change that the government made, where now you have to declare all dispositions, whether they're taxable or not, this is simply, again, another agreement where your client confirms to you whether they did or they did not sell a principal residence during the taxation year, and again, signed by your client. And then finally, starting as of page 5, we get to the pro forma questionnaire. And the pro forma questionnaire, again, in essence, is another checklist. So you produce this form at the end of the production of 2023 for the purposes of remitting it to your client and telling them to use it and consult it in order to provide you with all the relevant information that you need to produce their following year's return. So again, so you see here, it's a basic questionnaire where first it asks the client, in this case, some basic information on their status. From there, you get some general administrative questions, like, for example, what is their answer for Elections Canada or foreign property and direct deposit? And then finally, the program will personalize the pro forma questionnaire and ask the client to provide information that was found on their previous year's return. And it bases it on the results of the actual return. So it'll simply ask them to provide that information that they had last year, ensuring that you can produce an accurate return for the following year. And then finally, on the last page, you get more administrative questions that the program will ask your client in order to provide their answer. So again, the purpose of the form is you produce it with the client letter, remit it to your client, and ask them to consult it before they come and see you the following year to produce their following year's tax return. Again, ensuring a more accurate production of the actual return. So now let's have a look at another form that we recently added to the tax return screen, which deals with the optimizations between a couple or, for example, a dependent and a caregiver. And we call this the reconciliation of tax savings. So we know that with DT Max will optimize automatically and perform transfers between family members in order to optimize the tax return. So we know that DT Max does this in an automated way. There's no triggering in DT Max these optimizations. DT Max will always look for the best result possible. Therefore, when these optimizations happen, and of course you got this great optimization report that indicates that lists all these optimizations and what you can do to control them. But then what the program will also do is produce this form right here, which we call the Report on Tax Savings Reconciliation. And what this form will do is that it'll reconcile the tax savings between, for example, the couple, in this case, when they transfer amounts from one to the other in order to make things even between them. So we know that when these optimizations happen, whether it is a pension income split, whether it is a transfer of medical expenses or transfer of donations, there's always one spouse that will pay maybe a little bit more tax in order for their spouse to save even more tax, and the combined result will be better for them. So due to this, there's always that one spouse that will just pay a little bit more, right? Especially take, for example, pension income splitting. That's the perfect example of this. That lower income spouse will pay a little bit more tax in order to save more by taking away 50% of the pension income from the higher income spouse. So what the form will do is that it'll check all of these transfers that the program will do automatically, and it even includes amounts that are not even optimizations, such as childcare expenses, where you're not optimizing between the couple, but we know that the lower income spouse is the only one that can claim these childcare expenses, even though the other spouse has likely paid into those childcare expenses as well. So the program will include all these transfers that happen between the couple, and then will reconcile the tax savings between them. And essentially what it'll do is that it'll compute the number that the one spouse benefited over claiming certain amounts on the other. So you see it does this on a transfer by transfer basis, and you see it right there, childcare expenses, donations, etc. And then it'll reconcile the two amounts, what one benefited, what the other benefited, and then the net amount, it'll indicate that, for example, here, Paul benefited by $112 by claiming amounts on behalf of Diane. So in this case, they can now reconcile amongst them and basically even up on their tax return. So, we know that we have these difficult clients that don't want to do these kind of transfers between each other, and they're leaving money on the table. Well, now you have the form to convince them, in this case, to save on a combined basis, to take the money from the government in this case, and then from there, they can even up themselves afterwards to the penny, down to the penny in this case. Now, you could also control how the program does or performs this tax savings reconciliation through the keyword tax savings realloc. And then I could simply, double click here on the form itself, and the program will give me the keyword that I could use to change the reconciliation. So I could simply say add to the data entry. I'm right there now. So first I'll say to generate the report, and then I could choose amongst the transfers and how to reallocate. So let's take, for example, childcare. So we saw that the program assumes that childcare is paid 50-50 between the couple. And of course, we know that the federal rule is only the lower income spouse will claim the deduction. So in this case, if there's a different agreement between the couple, you could actually specify. Let's say, for example, that for this family, the family head pays 60% of the childcare and the spouse pays 40% due to their diverging incomes. So I can go to childcare over here. I can choose yes. And then under the secondary keyword here, childcare, I could say percentage claimed by the family head, 60%, and then the amount claimed by the spouse is 40%, because this is the agreement that they have amongst each other due to their diverging income. Now, whatever changes you make here does not affect the actual calculation or transfer or optimization that DT Max will do. It'll only affect the amount that they can reconcile amongst each other when these transfers happen. So then when I go to the tax return screen, you will notice now that this has changed the allocation of the child care deduction when it comes to the reconciliation. And now, of course, my result is different. And here now, Paul only owes $64 to Diane. So now let's have a look at tax changes and how they are reflected in DT Max for the upcoming tax year, which is 2024. We're going to look at two specific ones. The first one will be the capital gains inclusion rate change, and the second is going to be the refusal of deducting expenses on short-term rentals. So let's start with the capital gain. The government has announced a change in the inclusion rate for any dispositions as of the 25th of June 2024 and beyond the $250,000 threshold. For more details on this particular change, please consult the update session within Synergy 2024. So of course, the date of the disposition becomes really important in order for DT Max to apply this change of the rules. So when we are entering a capital gain, in this case, let's go into the general group, which is cap gain here. And let's choose the most common example, which would be stock, mutual funds, and other non-depreciable property. When entering these transactions now, the date of disposition becomes really important. It is the only way that DT Max can apply this rule change to the disposition. Now, when it comes to capital gains that come from T-slips, and let's try, for example, a T3 slip, you will notice that the capital gains options within these slips will have now two options: capital gains before June 25th, 2024, and capital gains after June 24th, 2024. Again, very important to properly select the option that is applicable in order for DT Max to apply this rule change. Now let's have a look at the changes to rental income, more specifically, the refusal of deducting expenses for short-term rentals under certain conditions. Again, to know what those conditions are and everything that pertains to the changes to the rules for short-term rentals, please consult the update session in Synergy 2024. Now, when we enter a rental income in DT Max, when we are entering, for example, the identification of the rental, you will notice now a new keyword within the business ID subgroup, which is short term. So at this point, you can simply indicate yes to confirm that a portion or all of the income that was gained by this rental property was a short-term rental. And by short-term rental, of course, we mean, things like Airbnb or Vrbo, etc. Now, the program then is going to ask you what percentage of the income and expenses incurred by this rental property was for short-term rental income. So simply enter the percentage, and therefore the program will be able to prorate the total rental income and expenses by the percentage that was used as a short-term rental. The way the CRA has structured the new T776 within the tax return is to first separate long-term rental income from short-term rental income, and then afterwards determining which portion of the short-term rental income is non-compliant, meaning that it is not eligible to be deducted against total rental income. So let's enter the income over here, and you've got, of course, gross rental income, and we enter the amount. And what the program will do here is that it will give you the option of prorating further the gross rental income. So picture this as basically an override to the automatic calculation of the software. Now, if I enter nothing in this sub keyword short term, the program's going to prorate the income by 25%, meaning it will give 75% to long-term rentals and 25% to short-term rental income. If I enter something in here under short term, the program's going to override this automatic proration of 25%. Now, this option will also be available under the expenses. So for example, when I enter interest over here, again, you will see another proration of short-term rent of the short-term portion as well. Again, if I leave this as is, DT Max will prorate the expenses by 25% and allocate that to the short-term rental portion of the income. However, if I enter something different under short-term portion, then it'll apply that specific amount. So it's like an override, essentially. You would only use the short-term portion keyword in unique scenarios where the proration allocated to the short-term portion for the expenses is different than the general short-term portion percentage. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have to first distinguish long-term rental income and expenses from short-term rental income and expenses, which I've just shown how to do. Now we must indicate the portion of the short-term rental expenses that are non-compliant based on the new rules set out by the federal government. So to do that, we have a new keyword now right here, which is non-compliant. So you choose the option, let's say the current expenditures in this case, non-compliant amount of expenses, and then you indicate the portion of the total short-term rental expenses that are non-compliant based on the new rules, meaning they cannot be deducted against rental income. So you indicate the address, the unit number, in this case, whichever the unit number is of that rental property, the portion of the total of the short-term rental expenses that are non-compliant, therefore non-deductible, and then indicate the days that that are non-compliant and the days that that unit, for example, was a short-term rental. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and got some useful tips and tricks on some of the more recent improvements of DT Max. Enjoy the rest of Synergy 2024 and have yourselves a great day.